Have you ever wanted to paint watercolor tulips but felt a little nervous about getting it right? Maybe you're worried about making mistakes or that your painting won't look perfect? Well, that's the great thing about watercolor. It doesn't have to be perfect. Watercolor is loose, expressive and freeing. And in this tutorial, I'll show you just how fun and easy it can be to create beautiful tulips even as a beginner. We'll be working step by step, and I'll take you through how to trace the tulip template, test your colors, apply a soft base wash and layer for depth. You'll also see me paint in real time for parts of the demo, and then I'll speed up sections to keep things moving. But feel free to pause, slow it down or watch at your own pace. And if you'd like to paint along with me, I've created 22 beautiful tulip templates for watercolor painting or coloring. These are available for my Patreon members. The link's in the description below. So grab your brushes and let's get started. Before we begin, let's go over the tools I'm using for this painting. Watercolors. I'm using Winsor & Newton, the professional range, and I'm using a mix of reds, violets, purples, blues, yellows and greens. Feel free to use whatever paint you may have. Paper. I am using a mixed media sketchbook with 200 gram paper. This is thick enough to handle washes of water. Brushes. I'm using a combination of Princeton and Daler Rowney brushes for different details in sizes 6 and 4. I'm using a pencil and eraser, a simple HB pencil for tracing and a kneaded eraser to lift any excess graphite. And I'm also using a light box, an LED light box, to help trace the template. If you don't have one, you can use a window and natural light instead. And I also have another video showing you how you can trace these templates using the lifting lead technique. I'll link it above. Right, I'm starting by tracing the tulip template lightly with an HB pencil. The key is to use soft, minimal pressure so that the lines don't show through your watercolor. If your pencil marks feel too dark in the end, just lightly dab with a kneaded eraser before painting. We want guidelines, not outlines. As you go along, you can lift up your sheet or turn off your light box and have a look at how your drawing is progressing. The tulips have simple organic shapes, so don't stress about making them perfect. A little variation in the petals will make them feel more natural. Before I start painting, I always like to test my colors first. I'm making a quick swatch on my paper using the colors I'll be working with: reds, purples, blues, yellows and greens. Testing your colors beforehand helps ensure that your palette is harmonious and that your colors work well together before you start layering them onto your painting. It also lets you see how your pigments might react with water, so you get clean, crisp and balanced colors in your final piece. If you're ever unsure about a color, always swatch first. It can save a lot of frustration later on. I like to start with the foliage first, because green tones set the foundation for the painting and help balance the composition. For the first wash, I'm using a light diluted green, letting the water do most of the work. You don't need to get everything perfect in one go. Watercolor is all about layering. As I paint, I'm leaving small white gaps where the light would naturally hit the leaves. This keeps them looking fresh and realistic, rather than flat. Now it's time to start the tulips. I'm applying a light, watery wash first, working from the top left to the bottom right because I'm right-handed and I'd like to avoid smudging my painting. Each tulip gets its own unique color. A red tulip with a soft, diluted crimson that blends into warm pinks. A blue tulip, a delicate sky blue that fades into a gentle cerulean blue. A purple tulip, a mix of violet and soft lavender. And a yellow tulip, a cheerful golden hue with a hint of orange eventually. You'll see I'm keeping this loose and fluid, allowing the colors to bleed slightly for a natural watercolor effect. If your colors dry too fast, you can re-wet the area with a clean brush to keep them soft. Now that the first wash is dry, I'm adding a second layer of colour to create more depth. For this step, I'm using slightly thicker paint and applying it only to the shadowed areas. This gives the flowers more dimension and makes them pop off the page. If the colours look too harsh, I soften the edges using a damp brush, blending the paint into the base layer. You can already see how layering brings the tulips to life. They start looking fuller with soft transitions between light and dark. Now it's time to paint the mason jar. Since glass is transparent, I'm keeping the washes very light, using soft blues and greens to suggest reflections. Instead of outlining the whole jar, I'm only painting where the glass catches light, leaving the middle areas mostly white. A little hint of shadow at the base makes it look like the jar is actually sitting on a surface. Now for the final step, adding shadows to make everything look grounded. A trick I love for realistic shadows is using a mix of ultramarine blue and a touch of violet. This creates a soft, natural looking shadow with some added interest. Instead of filling it in as a dark, harsh shadow, I use a wet on wet technique, letting the edges of the shadow softly fade into the paper. And with that, our tulip painting is complete. For final details, I like to use my permanent white pen to add some extra light areas, perhaps some light lines and some highlights on various parts of my final painting. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more easy watercolor lessons. Want to paint your own tulips? Grab my 22 tulip templates available for my Patreon members. You can use them for watercolor, coloring or sketching, and you can even import them into Procreate for some digital art. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching and happy painting!